Today I'm here with Scott Whitt. Scott is the president and general manager of Triad Clinical Trials, which he acquired through the ETA model. And I'm just glad to have you here. A lot of the people we have on our show, we get a lot of advisors and people who teach this, and or people who have done deal after deal after deal, and like true acquisition entrepreneurs. That's what they're going to do. But I honestly, the reason I'm excited having you here today is I really think you align with a lot of our listeners. They were in the field, they decided they wanted to buy something, and then they did it. And I've listened to one of your other interviews, so I'm really excited to have you here, Scott. Thank you for being here today.
I enjoy it. If I can help inform and motivate other folks, I like that. I wish I found somebody like me before I did this. I would still do it. I'd just done it a lot more intelligently.
That's cool. So all right. Let's kind of get into this. So you were in the industry. Now, correct me it's okay to correct me at any time during this if I read something wrong or have something wrong. But you were in the industry that you chose prior to acquiring this. Can you tell me how did you come about that? Okay, I'm gonna buy myself a company. How did you come to how did you come to the decision to make the switch from, employee, consultant, worker to owner?
Right. It probably happened a couple of different times. And when I finally made the decision, it was a combination of really understanding the motivations and my trajectory on the big five consulting path, and what I wanted for my life and what my wife and I wanted for our family and our kids. And I think, as a big moment for me personally was when I entered Deloitte as a partner. That's a very rare beast. They're very selective. They're very tough. They do their best to make you go away. And if you're too stupid to quit, then they start having a real conversation with you. Life-changing organization. Really loved it. I was probably in over my head for a while, to be honest. But very, very gimlet-eyed view of where I would be able to go in that world. And it was good, certainly more than I'd ever hoped coming out of grad school, but felt I could do better. I also found that as you move up in any organization, Deloitte's not unique, the senior politics get far more intricate and far more deadly. You have to spend more time than I wanted to thinking about who you need to take out and trying to figure out who's trying to take you out. And really, I love the client work. I love working with the teams. I love sales and business development. And so at that point, as you move into that world, your compensation goes up noticeably. And they gave us a couple of financial planning seminars that, hey, don't buy the boat, don't buy the lake house, just figure out where you're going first. And so my wife and I sat down and had a conversation like, well, we're not going to buy a house. We're not going to upgrade. We certainly could have. But we started to bank the difference in income and bank all the bonuses, knowing we were going to do something like this at some point. And it was probably 4 or 5 years later when this opportunity presented itself. So it was a combination of having made that decision, ensuring I had resources to get started or have a serious negotiation, and then finding the right opportunity.
Now, what had you decide to buy versus build? A lot of people are just entrepreneurial, and I even catch myself sometimes going, I'll just go start landing some customers in this field and build something out. And what's your thought process? I know why I don't want to do it. I'm 50, and that's a lot of energy.
It's a young person's role. So I was never entirely against starting something, but having worked in healthcare and for some really entrepreneurial organizations, I knew a lot of work colleagues and friends who went out on their own, who were at least as smart as I was, maybe even had a better work ethic, and failed, just simply failed. In healthcare, a lot of strengths. It's a big chunk of the economy. It's not going away. Once you're in. But the uptake for a new healthcare provider or a healthcare entity to take you on as an unproven, unknown entity is extremely low. You really need to have a 5 to 7 year plan to hit critical mass. And I, through the interview you mentioned and some of my other postings, I'm working with a number of folks who are thinking they're going to build a clinical trial site or buy a clinical trial site. And, I'm just very transparent about what we did. And as I looked at starting another consulting entity or technology company, all the successes make the news, but the 15 failures before that don't. And once you've failed once or twice, you've depleted your IRA and 401k, used up your HELOC, and your kids are hungry, and that's lots of good people have ended up in very difficult circumstances for that. So we really focused in on acquiring something that existed, understanding that nobody sells a perfectly good, fun to run, highly profitable business for no reason. You are acquiring somebody else's problem and somebody else's drama at some level. We were just very careful. I was very careful in vetting the things that came on the market, and at least tried to convince myself I could handle the problems and drama that came with it that they would not reveal or didn't see as problems. And I think we made a very good choice in doing that. I went down pretty deep dives on about 5 different companies. Some were services based, some were technology based. And profitability was good. And as I was looking at them, I would have almost as a toss off, start talking to the owner about, well, what's your retirement plan? What are you going to do after this? And unless they had a really well-defined plan that involved them being in another part of the country, just not touching that. Particularly in a small business, the brand is often so intertwined with the founder and the owners that you can't, and they can't sell that. And we've looked at other acquisition targets since then, and I get down to it, and the owners put themselves all over the website. Sometimes it's a physician, doctor this, doctor that. It's like, that's fabulous, but now it's just me, and nobody's going to like me as much as they like you. And so we've shied away from those, and we may not do another acquisition. Who knows? But those were the things that we weighed on, kind of big picture. At the next level, I knew from one of my roles at Quintiles, a big pharmaceutical research company, that the demand for clinical trials is not decreasing. I turn away work now. I cannot sign another contract for 6 or 7 months because I just don't have capacity. And that's another problem to solve. But once we were out there, once I was out there and engaged, finding business is the least difficult part of this piece of the world we're in. I always know I can go get revenue, and that is another thing. If you're moving from the corporate world to business ownership, entrepreneurship, you forget that, I get paid every 2 weeks. The company pays me. Look at my health insurance card. I didn't have to do anything to have. Look at my vacation time. This is all fabulous. Once it's you provision all of that. You provide that. And if you have employees and you have staff, they expect you to provide that without much drama. And that can be, we had some months where we had to dip into savings to cover payroll during an unanticipated lull. And you've got to be prepared for those moments.
I get it. Let's talk a little bit about the search, because you said it didn't happen overnight, and were you using like a broker? Were you visiting all the online, just the typical online biz by sales? What was your process to locate the targets you were looking at?
Yeah, mostly it was biz by sell. I think that's where we found this one. And then, there's a couple of companies out there, you probably the names far better than I do, but they'll have listings on their website. Mm-hmm. And they're not on there or not as good or whatever. So I'd like to tell you it was a systematic, structured search. It was not. It was kind of episodic, and man, today really sucked. I'm going to go find my own thing right now. And I'd spend all night searching the boards, and that particular drama would pass, and I'd spend another year slaving away for somebody else's bottom line. But just getting on those bulletin boards and with the websites, set up the notifications, have an NDA and a high level financial disclosure scanned and ready to send off to a broker. Just engage in them. And brokers, you don't really need to have any education, experience, or capacity for honest work to become a broker. There's so many of them out there.
I was just talking about that yesterday on one of the shows. It's like a lot of states don't even require a license. I'm in California now, but I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And when we first got this, a friend of mine said, I'll just go buy a brokerage and then we'll have lots of leads. And I was like, you can't just do that. And we did the research, and sure enough, he could. And now he owns a brokerage, and leads just don't come in like that. So I kept telling him, nah, that's not how that works. But, you got to market still. The same marketing, the same marketing goes. So it's still not a bad decision for him. Don't get me wrong, but he bought it. He bought a brokerage, and he's like, "You want to be a broker? I'll make a business card for you." Like, I was like, "Yeah, I don't want that." So a lot of states are like that. Even here in California, there's no licensing exam that I know of to be a business broker. You have to have been a real estate broker for a while because of the real estate side of it.
Right.
Like,
That makes
so,
sense.
I mean, so there is a licensing requirement, but I'm not sure that there's a test or anything. So yeah, you're right. It's a little flooded, right? A lot of people put that hat on way before they're qualified to put that hat on.
Right. And they're all going to fall short, to be
Yep.
honest. Even if you like them and they're a good person, the broker that we worked with was representing the previous owner. He was a very thorough financial analyst. The bid package was well constructed, not as strong on the business development and other key parts. And I probably was overly confident in the work he did. We paid for that, paid dearly. But in many respects, he was good, and the transaction would not have happened with him. But I would encourage anybody who's even thinking about that just to start picking your targets, come up with what your parameters are, cash flow, industry, profit margin, whatever, works for you, and just start talking to brokers. It's kind of like shopping for cars. You talk to 10 or 15 car salesmen, it gets annoying after a while, but you start to learn who speaks the truth, who's honest, who's cagey, and who's got some value for that. And I encourage you to do that.
So did you own businesses before that? You come straight from consulting world where you were working for other people into owning your own?
So it was pretty much just a dive off the cliff. So in the Deloitte, you're a partner, you're an owner. Mostly, you still reported to the senior partner overlords who drive and dictate policies and procedures. But at that level, you own revenue acquisition, you own hiring, you own career development for your teams. I mean, as
So
much as you can.
you were pretty rounded, and a lot of guys I talked to getting into this space is acquisition through entrepreneurship, and they just got out of college, or they are still working for somewhere else, but they've never owned so much as a lemonade stand. And the one thing I kept telling them, and I think you really would address this in yours, and I'm gonna ask, but is financials are more important than anything. If you don't have the experience to that, like, in doing turnarounds and growing businesses and doing startups, find something that's so financially strong it's yours to mess up. Right, it's up, it's running, got great cash flow, it pays all the bills, it doesn't have any months where in the last 3 years you're analyzing, it doesn't look like they pulled money out of the pocket to keep it going. You want something super strong because you got to have it running up and doing what it does while you're going through your learning curve. Were
Right.
you really concerned about like how strong the financials were so that you could adjust to being the owner operator?
I was, and I may have been overly conservative, to be honest.
Hmm.
I'm very confident in my ability to fix problems. That's what you do as a consultant: figure things out, build business relationships. I've never not been able to go find a new client. So those are my skill sets. That's what I brought to this. What I didn't have, and we still struggle with a little bit, is kind of the fine attunement of a professional CFO or a controller who manages cash flow better, tracks these things. But when we looked at the business, we looked at the financials. The gross margins were ridiculously high. Like this is not believable. So I asked for some more information. Really, what had happened as this business evolved. To do clinical trials, you don't need a lot of infrastructure. You can rent a clinic, you can rent the equipment. You don't really invest in computer systems because the pharmaceutical companies turn on all the systems you need to do data entry and patient management. They ship you all your lab kits and supplies. The upfront overhead can be extremely low. And until very recently, and still 80% of our business is done on paper. You come in for a clinical trial visit, we open up a 8-inch binder. This had your last 5 visits and your next 5 visits. We go to the 15-page chart and blood pressure and assessments, and the doctor comes in and talks to you and writes and signs. I mean, it's 1975 here most of the day. So the woman that started it, she did a really great job in building the brand and developing a patient database and having good pharmaceutical company relationships, but everything else was manual. She did payroll by hand with a calculator and the booklet with the withholding tables in it, if you remember that. Third-hand computers, third-hand desks, very, very basic. But, the gross margins on the day-to-day business were north of 80%. And that's like, I looked at that and thought, well, now that, she's hugely underinvested, which is why she can't scale it. And this is why she's getting out. And I thought, well, with an 80% margin, I've got some run rate to figure things out and break a few things and come back. And it turns out my learning curve was much steeper than I had anticipated. So that was important. And just my learning curve about how if the healthcare at the retail level is very different from healthcare at the corporate level. And I fooled myself into thinking I understood the whole thing, and I did not. And I would say for the first year and a half, the skills I brought around coaching and development and all of that and team building that worked really well in a Deloitte were a complete disaster in the clinic. And, I really had to retool. So I would say, long answer to your short question, which is what consultants do. It's just part of the deal of talking with me is, that was critical. That was critical. When I saw the margins and I saw the, kind of how the business positioned itself and understood at a very rudimentary high level how the business was structured, like, it needs a lot of work and it needs to be able to scale, but we've got enough cash flow to cover that. Looking back, I knew we were going to be paying a premium for the name and some of the staff and some of the infrastructure, and we probably overpaid slightly and maybe more than slightly. But in the the long run, it was far better than starting from scratch, simply because it takes you 5 or 6 years again to get to critical mass, and I didn't have that kind of support and investment dollars in the bank.
So let's walk through this just a little bit. Like you're scrolling, and there's a reason I'm doing this because I'm curious. You're scrolling through Biz Buy Sell. What caught your first eye? Like when you see in this particular deal, the one you own now. Can you remember? Can you go back and remember? Was it the numbers? What caught your eye and made you want to investigate this one a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think is a general process. Not that I do this every time, but I still look because we're thinking we might buy something else in a related or who knows. But I would sort of set the standard parameters for cash flow, geography, and industry. And I kept my search pretty broad because I was open to other industries, but healthcare I know the best. So I went through, and the posting was clinical trial site for sale. And I had been working in healthcare long enough, and I've been working at Quintiles, which is a big research roll up. I had done some consulting at big practices around clinical trials. I go, I know how this works. I feel comfortable. I could figure it out, and I know that most pharmaceutical companies have a hard time finding enough sites to do the work the way they want it done. So I was very comfortable into the industry. I would find it interesting. I mean, for what we spent, we probably could have opened up 15 Dunkin' Donuts, but I'm not that interested in donuts. And if I am, it's not good for my health. So, you kind of weed those things out. Is it a good fit for my knowledge base? Is it something I care about? I've been in healthcare for many, many years, too many regime changes and regulatory reform, Obamacare. I've worked with small HMOs and physicians and big insurance companies, and I care about healthcare. I mean, I really do. When I was just a young group rep with Aetna, I worked with a lot of small business owners who, were great people running wonderful businesses, but completely hamstrung by the cost of healthcare. A lot of empathy for the average person stuck in a very complicated system. So I get excited about the work and the research we do over and above the business aspect. So those things kind of came together. And then looking at the financials, I was comfortable enough that I could let go of corporate America with savings and an SBA loan and a line of credit and some working capital and figure this out. And within very broad parameters with a lot of comfort margin, because fundamentally I am very financially conservative. My wife has been staggered at how lax I've become. For the first 2 years, as we were pouring all of our free cash back into the business, we actually ran up credit card balances, and I I still hate credit card balances. I don't want to give those banks 12%. This is not your money. I earned it. But we did that as a way to accommodate the needs of the business. But you've got to really get really comfortable that you're going to be able to swing regularly in that strike zone. Because your learning curve just on day-to-day operations is way steeper than you can imagine. And if you don't have backup and you don't have the financial acumen to manage that stuff along with that, you're not certainly headed for disaster, but it's not going to be pretty. And it's going to take you a lot longer than you realize. And again, the culture lionizes entrepreneurs, and all the success stories are all over the newspaper, and social media. The 35 companies that failed don't never get a story written about them. So you got to take that into account.
Oh, I've had a few that got covered in stories and still didn't make it.
Oh yeah, no, that's risky too. So I don't do too much of this stuff. I don't want that curse on me.
I had a pretty good little site that was featured by TechCrunch, and
Wow.
it got lots of traffic and everything. And then AdSense changed their policies, and I was basically that's how I monetized the entire site. And overnight, it didn't even make sense to spend all the time and the staff it took to regulate what people were posting on the website, right? So it wasn't a good business model.
That's a generalizable risk in any industry. I think what's harder to communicate is I knew the fundamentals of this business and how it operated independent of any contractual form or technology or anything, that there's a huge demand for what we do and a huge demand for people like us who can deliver patients and do high quality work, and everything else can be fixed. A lot of people who've started healthcare websites or this or that, you're right, Google changes the algorithm or the privacy rules change and suddenly your profitable business is just gone. We are not susceptible to that. And I don't think I would have put my life savings into something like that, which maybe makes me less of an entrepreneur and less of a risk taker. But, I felt like the cards were really stacked in our favor when we signed the paperwork on this one.
So you found it on a site. You liked what you seen. You started diving into it. What was the length of the process? Was it did you guys go quickly through it, or did it take 6 or 8 months to negotiate, like average, or what would you say the process looked like to you from the day you made that first NDA signing, start seeing some numbers, until the day you showed up at the front door with the keys?
Right. Yeah. So thinking back, it's a bit of a blur, but I want to say it was late May or early June of 2016, actually, when I saw the site. I had been in contact with the broker. He said somehow I would miss this listing. He already had 3 interested people come out to the clinic and meet the owners and chat. And but they were not healthcare, and they were people looking. He says a lot of people like you are looking to buy your job. You want out of corporate America and you're going to buy something profitable. And he brought me out and we met with the owner after hours. I think I made her really comfortable that I understood the industry, that I really cared about research. I need to feed my kids and get them through college, and I want to have a nice car too, but I care about this. I want to see a new Alzheimer's treatment or a new gout treatment come to market. And she felt very comfortable. I think what put her over the edge is that because I had walked in the halls of big pharma and I negotiated with the big, hairy, obnoxious egos that I think she struggled with, as a single mother without a college degree, dealing with guys like me on the side of the table. I think that was probably one of her big pain points in the world. Like, that was not going to be an issue for me. Like, you can bluff me all you like. You're going to show your cards and we're going to do business or we're not. So I think all of those things combined made it comfortable that we were the right people to buy it. So at that point, it was less about negotiation. It was about due diligence. We used an SBA loan. And the broker had a guy, which, helps because they had pre-approved it. SBA had done an initial scan of it, but it limited my ability to go look for additional financing or the financing options. I would say the biggest chunk of it was really getting the SBA paperwork right, and getting our corporate structure right. The actual negotiation of the pricing and the terms wasn't that hard. I was pretty sure, without trying to communicate it, that it was going to be a long time before something this ideal for us was going to come along. So I wasn't going to lose this over $100,000 or $200,000 on the price. And I think they sensed that. So I kind of put myself at a disadvantage. Once we were committed, I didn't really have a walk away point, which if you ever want to just talk about negotiations in general, different podcasts, that's, you need to be able to stand up and walk out and not look back. And if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to win the negotiation. You have to take what's on the table, and that's where we were. So I would have, the due diligence probably wasn't deep enough, and I took a lot of things at face value. Honestly, the biggest wrinkle we ran into was cash flow and accounts receivables. In this business, we probably only invoice for about 20% of the revenue. Those are specific tasks. Much like any other healthcare entity that sees patients, you get paid per patient visit and what goes on in the visit. And so the patient comes in, we do all the visits, we enter all the data into the computer system. At some point in the next 30 days, the pharmaceutical company reviews all the data we put in there. They'll ask us questions, follow up, so you're back and forth for a week or two. And then probably 45 days after the visit, they put it in their system for payment. And it's still, 90-day payment cycles are still pretty common here, which can be stressful. And you haven't really, and there was no financial system in place. So the woman actually had taken a ruler and a pencil and a piece of poster board and had hand drawn a spreadsheet for each study, and we're marking off each visit, and was hand ticking off visits on the remittance advice from the pharmaceutical company. She didn't really have a good handle on what receivables were, and they were much lower than they had presented. And I think to do over again, I would just do more time on due diligence and linking that receivables number, anything they've represented about cash collection and cash management and cash flow, to some variable that gives you a little bit to fall back on. I'm not going to say it was outright fraud, but it was wildly misleading in a way that I did not expect.
There's something to be said. We talk a lot about this a lot on the show. Most of the people that you're going to go out there, especially at this level where it's sub $10 million revenue companies, they didn't go out with the intention of starting this company. They were good at something. They picked up some, very likely she struck out on her own. She picked up one or two clients, started doing work for them, and it just kind of grew from there. And you said that she had no business degree and stuff like that. Nobody's ever sat down and told them how to do accounting. Nobody's ever sat down and showed them how to do this other, the other elements of running business. So when you get in there and look at it and those elements aren't there, they belong there, but can you really hold that against that other entrepreneur? They've made it for 5, 10, 15 years and got past that hump. The one thing we were talking about earlier is so many of these businesses fell in the first 5 to 10 years. They made it past that if you're looking at them. So there's something to give them for that, but there's also something to be said, like, you don't have this stuff in a system. What do you have it on? And how can you show me it's accurate? You already answered the question I was leading into from that is, like, as you were going through the process, you liked it at the beginning. At any point did it start to change and you start looking at this and going, okay, well, there's some information here I wish I'd have known. Was the accounts receivable the only got you, or is there a lot more? Like, what were the lessons learned? What would you do differently on your next acquisition?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson is just really a much more thorough and transparent financial due diligence. What is the performance? What happens, and I've been involved on the healthcare side, lots of mergers and acquisitions, and a lot of stuff until you've actually signed the paper and you can see all the financials. What happens implicitly or explicitly is the sellers is juicing the business. They're doing everything they can in the year to 6 months prior to transaction to drive down costs and build up revenues, so that your margin, because you're priced on a multiple of cash flow. The bigger the cash flow, every dollar you get in cash flow is worth $3 to $4 on the price. So the incentive to cook the books is high. The bigger issue is just I call it burn rate. You're consuming your fundamental goodwill or your ability to deliver on contracts ahead of time to advance cash flow. So on a couple of contracts she was overcommitted and didn't really have the staff and equipment on board to do the work to deliver to the end of the contract. And had really underinvested in a couple of things within in the clinic that we had to go back and fix. And so again, I won't say it was outright fraud or intentional, but you can I like to drive a stick shift, and so a good moment is when you jam that thing down to third and bury the tack in the red line, and that's a great moment, and that's when the car feels the best. But it takes its toll, and you can't do that all the time. Right. That's what a good seller, with probably the advice of the broker, is actually doing. So it ends up with a lot of financial window dressing. You just kind of say, well, we'll take that as a given, and we'll allot 10% of the price just for this airball. Capital consumption is the term that consultants will use for that kind of behavior. And then let's get down to what the real fundamentals of the business are and price it like that. The SBA loan officer did not want us putting an earnout in there, which is a common way of dealing with that. He said we end up in a lot of he said, she said court fights that don't go anywhere. So we're less likely to approve your loan if there's an earnout in it or any sort of owner financing, because that's the same thing.
Right.
So I would do that. And then you constantly need to gut check. Do I really want to do this? Is this going to be my life? Am I that committed? Is my family that committed to this thing? And if you have, and sometimes you're going to answer no. I mean, you're going to have panic attacks, and it's going to be like, I'm not doing that. I must be insane. And if you're not experiencing that at some point, you're not thinking hard enough, to be honest.
Did you hit that point of what the hell have I done? Did you have that spot? Anytime?
Yeah.
Within the first year, probably solely.
Several times. We can talk about those. They were instructive and painful. I'll grab a tissue. We go over some of those. But I never wavered on my conviction that the market was strong. Very confident in my ability to pick up a phone, get enough meetings and calls set up to find new business. And that's where and if you're going to be an entrepreneur, again, you watch TV, it's a bunch of well-dressed, skinny people with great haircuts having earnest meetings in their well-designed, architecturally significant offices. And it's probably 5% of my work life. It's a lot of it is finding new business and finding clients and overcoming objections and getting out there and negotiating contracts and that kind of stuff that is not glamorous and not usually done by good-looking people with nice haircuts. That you really have to, that business development piece and that cash collection has got to be a passionate part of your day, just like whatever your craft or your skill or whatever brought you to that business. I mean, I always wanted to bring in we've done some gout studies with these revolutionary new infused proteins that have fundamentally cured gout for a lot of people. And it was a couple of young guys who had genetically predisposed to gout who couldn't work in their 30s. And they went through a study and they're still gout free. And, I've gotten emotional letters from all those guys and I love that. That is just, so great. But
I had a friend in the military who got it and got his feet all swollen up and they booted him out. There was nothing. And he spiraled, man. I don't know what happened to him. I call him a friend, but somebody you met for 2 or 3 weeks in training, but he spiraled out. I kept up with him for a few months after he got out and he spiraled out, drugs, alcohol. I mean, and it was just because he felt like he couldn't contribute to the one thing he really liked doing.
Yep. So all that stuff comes into play and you got to be committed to that, but understand that the actual activities that move the needle in any business is that business development, cash generation, new client acquisition. And, a lot of people don't have the stomach for that. They don't like being told no. Or if you call somebody 3 times, they don't call you back. Well, I guess that's dead. No, it's not. You got to keep at it. And that's got to be as important as anything about the business you particularly like.
I got it. So now, and the point of the story here, we've looked at for business. You found something, you've acquired it, you found a few things in there. One of the things, the entrepreneur in me is not going to let this slide. You mentioned that your sales cycle, like from the day you close the business, see a client to the day you put money in your bank, would sound like it could be like 120 to 130 days. Was that, what was the
Yep.
sales cycle when you got it? Were you able to fix that at all?
A little bit, but I found a better way around it. A lot of this, particularly when you're dealing with a big global pharmaceutical company, who we've done some big Alzheimer's studies where we're one of 600 sites across the globe. And when you're a Fortune 50 CFO and you're dealing with a $2 million clinic, I mean, we're not even on rounding error. So they say, well, the financials of this say we're going to pay you every 180 days. Take it or leave it. And so you take it. But as I go through and work through my overhead numbers and how we structure payments and upfront costs, I build in probably 100-day collection cycle in, and then put in an additional 2% in overhead to cover the cost of capital, so I can fund that. And then suddenly I'm not stressing about cash. I've got enough money to maintain a line of credit, so I can keep the business operating until we get cash. They always pay. I've never. Well, that's not true. Almost always they pay. Mm-hmm. They've never. Once you've honestly done the work and they're happy and it's complete, they're going to cut you a check for the full amount. They're not going to hide. They're not going to snowball. Most doctors are always fighting with Blue Cross about this and that. We don't have that.
Right.
And if we're even if there's a contract in place, if we find out it takes more effort to do a particular procedure or it's harder to find patients, I've almost always been able to reopen up negotiations on the contract and get our costs covered. But you have to find creative ways around that. And the fact that I don't whine about cash collection cycles or send them nasty grams every couple of weeks when I'm waiting on a check makes us a little bit easier to do business with than other sites. And I won't tell you it's a game changer, but it does make it easier for us to maintain cordial relationships when the financials get tight. It's
so critical that a lot of entrepreneurs don't even especially new entrepreneurs right out of school, they don't get that. If you've got 120, 130, 180 day cycle from the day you do your work to get to the day to get paid, you have to become an expert in cash flow management. Most businesses don't die. And I've done a lot of research on that. Most businesses don't die because it was a bad idea, bad market fit. A lot of those die off fast, right? Unless you've got some VC backing and stuff to hold you through a float to try to create a market fit. Those die fast. But the companies have been around 2 or 3 years. They die because of cash flow management more than anything else, right? And you're stepping into this new, it's yours now. To have the foresight to look at that and go, okay, I'm going to have to put a system in place to manage this very carefully. I'll say kudos to you, man. I have a knee-jerk reaction. If you told me I'm looking at something, you tell me it's a 180-day sales cycle from the day I do my work to the day I close. I want to know how much cash reserves the company has and how we're going to hold them there, right? Because that's my biggest concern is and I don't leave a lot of cash laying around. I'm a real estate investor by previous addiction. So if there's a bunch of money laying around, I want to put it to work. So I'll go, I'll buy another house with it or something. Yeah, I think we probably have we're probably over a little too much in cash reserve. And that's just part of my fundamental nature. It gives us a lot of flexibility in going after. We develop a bit of a niche in our world, and those clients are a little longer to develop, a little bit harder to work with, but it pays off down the road if you've done it well. So we probably are setting out a bit too much cash day to day, but I'm reluctant to put that out to work if I can't get my hands on it, if we need to cover a month or two until that happens. You almost have to for what you're doing there. Let's talk about, you got my curiosity up there. I've heard gout, I've heard Alzheimer's and stuff. What's the coolest thing you've ever done a clinical trial on to help out with? Alzheimer's sounds pretty cool. A lot of people are impacted by that.
Yeah.
So
So what I think the gout was the most compelling one, just from the just the moment of it. And this was until very recently very healthy guy working out all the time, good diet. I've had very few health issues just because of age that they're coming up. But one thing in general that the best thing that happened to me that was unexpected was the connection I developed with our patients. Um, didn't occur to me, it didn't cross my mind. But in the first year or so, I did some patient recruiting myself, calling people out of the database, or somebody to respond to a Facebook ad, and you're on the phone with people. And a big swath of America is not well educated. They don't have basic health nutrition information. They know they have diabetes, or they have gout, they have heart failure, but they don't understand the underlying drivers of it. And if you're on Medicaid or you don't have health insurance, and a lot of people who come into clinical trials don't, you're kind of a lost soul in a very complicated world. So, getting to know these people and hearing their stories, and gout in particular, because it's so painful, it's so debilitating. And then on these, it's a bit of a technical issue here, but a lot of new drugs are infused proteins, and they're very complex, and your immune system doesn't like them sometimes, and you can go into anaphylaxis very quickly. So when we're doing gout studies, we have the patients here for 6 to 12 hours in the clinic. And, we got in the habit of, we do the dosing and most of the assessments in the morning, they're just hanging out. We're drawing blood and EKGs and that kind of stuff. But, lunchtime, we'd sit at the common table in the workroom with the patient and the staff, and just everybody, I'll bring in lunch for everybody, just get to know everybody, and hear their stories and all of that. And then again, there were a couple of guys, they were farm workers from way out in the country in rural North Carolina. And, they were a little overweight, and their diet was horrific, and they probably burned 8,000 calories a day, but they both had gout and they couldn't work. I mean, they just weren't able to feed their kids. And so being able to, put them on the study drug and monitor them, and this was the first time they had really spent time with a physician to learn about gout. They'd been hustled from one free clinic to another where they got what the best that those clinics could do. But, when you come to our clinic for a clinical trial, if the doctor wants to spend an hour with you talking about this stuff, please do it. We just built a pharmaceutical company for that. So that is, probably the best unexpected thing that happened is my connection, my emotional connection to our patients and how they're treated and what we can do for them. And when I go to conferences and talk to my former colleagues, like, you guys have no idea when you talk about these things, what it's like to be a clinical trial patient or to be a nurse or a physician in a clinical trial working with these folks. And they get the benefit of my lecture after that, on what it's like. But that's been, I think I may have drifted off a little bit from your initial question. Redirect me if you need to.
that's okay. You caught my attention when you said you have to watch them for anaphylactic. I've done that I've been in that situation. I've been in an anaphylactic shot 3 times in my life. 2 of them at home. I have severe allergies, and not so much, but there can be a sequence where I'm around cats and had it's about allergy season, and I didn't take my steroid-based medicine or whatever. And next thing I know, I've got hives and I'm gasping for air and looking for an EpiPen. Right.
Yep.
Happened twice like that. And then the other one, I was actually doing the allergy treatment at a Kaiser allergy clinic, and I was only 2 or 3 weeks into the thing where they give you little doses of what you're allergic to.
Right.
And I told them, so I have a chest cold today. Should I do this? Oh, you're such low doses, no problem. And they gave me my shots, and I sitting there waiting because you wait under observation where the nurses
Yep.
are around. So nurses walked by and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Nah, I think so. I'm breathing a little funny." She goes, Raise up your shirt." And I raised up my shirt. I had hives all over me. And the
Oof.
next thing I know, I wake up with the two. I'm sure it didn't happen this way, but in my mind, I woke up and there was a guy charging pads, and I could hear the heartbeat thing behind me, like it was stopping and going. And I'm like, "No, I'm okay. Don't do that," because they already took off my shirt, had a tube down my throat, and a helicopter was on its way because this was an allergy clinic, and they were taking me to the hospital. And so I feel for you if you're working with stuff that can put people in that situation, the amount of care you have to give them and watch over them, you're going to build a bond with them, because that when that happens,
Yeah.
like that all, like, they wouldn't let me do the allergy treatment anymore. Like, that was too low of a dose. That was just too risky if you're going to go into shock like this. This is not for you. So luckily, something happened over the years, and my allergies are nowhere near what they used to be.
Yeah, we've had that happen several times. One of our physicians is an ER doc, and we the first time we got through and it was fine, but we were unhappy. We were not through. So he came in, rewrote our we call it severe adverse event, infusion reaction. So we built a crash cart. We had the fire department come out several different times, walk through the building. We know down to the 15 seconds of these three signs, these two drugs are injected, we get the oxygen, we call 911. And the second time it happened, within 4 minutes, that patient was in a EMT's gurney, and within 12 minutes, they were in the ER in the local hospital.
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, it moves so fast. You go from, hey, I got bumps on me, to I can't breathe, and right. For me, my throat swelled shut. It's what that's why they ran a tube down my throat and sprayed steroids into my lungs. And
no, our medical director, Rich Montgomery, is a retired ER doc, and he's the calmest guy on the planet. Like, he sees it. Yeah, I've seen a couple of young guys die, peanut reaction, and they didn't get here in time. That's not happening here.
At home, it sounds horrible, but at home, I hit myself with an EpiPen. I keep children's Benadryl on the liquid, and I'll down the damn thing because I'm like, right now, I usually live remote. I don't know why. I'm living in the redwood forest of California. I think it'd take 25 minutes for an ambulance to get here, at least. Right.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that in general, the EpiPen hit only lasts 15 to 20 minutes. Yeah. And if the underlying cause isn't resolved, you're going to go back into anaphylaxis. So if you ever hit that pen, I encourage you to get to the ER.
Yeah, so I mean, that's exactly what, So anyway, sorry, we went off on a tangent. I have a personal relation to that, and it's not fun.
Well, I think that was the one time I saw a really profound look of doubt on my wife's face about where I had taken us. Because I had to call her and said, hey, by the way, this patient we had today, went into anaphylaxis and they're in the ER. And so it's like, but we came back and we talked to the scientist developing the drugs, and our physician was great. He said, hey, this is a risk. When you're doing research, or when you're on the cutting edge of medication and therapy, there is some risk, and that's all in the consent. And but it was a very discombobulating moment. You probably would not have had in the donut shop.
Right. Some people are allergic to certain things in there. But the going back to the business side of it, how do you secure or protect yourself from something like that? Is there insurances you have in place? Is there, I mean, I know there's disclosures and all that other stuff.
Sure.
But, waiver, risk waivers and stuff people sign when they do clinical trials, but there's still some risk associated with, like, I don't care what that guy signed. If one of those guys dies on your floor, his family's suing you.
Right. It works better than you would think. For a while, malpractice was the kind of a media darling, and there was a lot of Sturm and Drang. And I'm not saying the system works perfectly, but in general, kind of under FDA regulations and federal legislation, the pharmaceutical companies are largely protected. We're certainly indemnified for any drug-related adverse event or damage, even if it's indirect. We did have one patient who was on, it was the same gout study, but the drug we deliver it with some immunosuppressants, and she got a UTI infection that went severe and was hospitalized for that. We were indemnified against that, as long as we follow the protocol. And we do everything to the letter of the protocol as it's written. And we're obsessive about that. We're just obsessive about not screwing up, which is why you can take 2 hours with the patient, where I'm not rushing you to any visit because we cannot have a mistake. We store the drug appropriately. We get the informed consent signed. You spend time talking to the physician before you're dosed. If you're in a research study in a big academic medical center, you might talk to a nurse or an internist, but here you talk to the doctor about the risks. So there's really no legal liability there, as long as we've done everything right. Now, if we have not handled the drug properly, or if we've misdosed or missed information, it becomes a bit grayer. But I've got a blanket professional liability policy for clinical trials that just covers any licensed provider who does work for us for the required amounts. We've not, even when this guy went into anaphylaxis, he called and, we covered his deductible and co-insurance. The medical company, pharmaceutical company reimbursed us for that. We sent him a stack of Chick-fil-A gift cards, just to, instead of worrying about this, go have something to eat. You work around that stuff, and it's less of an issue. We feel very comfortable, and because we don't do treatment outside of clinical research, our malpractice premiums are actually quite low. And again, we are emphatic and diligent when it comes to protocol adherence, documenting deviations. I have to screen very carefully when I hire people into the clinic, because most nurses and a lot of medical assistants, they see 30 patients a day. Their paperwork's sloppy. It's just going to get done at the end of the day. It may be right. It may not be right. And in that environment, that's fine. Here, it's not. And
You're working for that paperwork, right?
Oh gosh, I've had to let a few really good people go because it didn't, on one hand, we've hired a couple of grizzled old ICU nurses who, if you were sitting in that gurney, that's who you want, making sure you don't die. But their stubbornness and approach to work just doesn't work for us. And that's just a quirk of the business. It's not a comment on any health provider's capabilities.
It's culture too. Like, you have to figure out what works best for your environment, and make sure you have the people that are willing to play that way. We're running out of time. I just realized what time it is here. Let's talk a little bit about, like, what's the future look like for you guys? Are you going to grow through acquisition at some point, or do acqui-hire, or at least, maybe acquire other clinical trial companies to staff up, or what's your thought process on
so it's a good question. We're my wife and I are having a philosophical discussion about this right now. We're at a crossroads with our medical director who came with the business. He's retired. He's fabulous. He's probably done 300 clinical trials. He looks like he stepped off the set of a TV medical show. It's great demeanor, but he's retired. He wants to start traveling. And so we've got to find a new medical director. We have a couple of opportunities to grow the business. We've looked at a couple of sites. There's always 2 or 3 for sale somewhere in the country, often in Los Angeles or Miami, big concentration, sometimes New York City. I'm reluctant to get myself into a situation where I've got to travel weekly again, just for quality of life. And who wants to do that? That's a young person's game. Yeah. So that kind of focuses it. I've got one of my sons is up at UNC Asheville in the mountains, and there was a coffee shop for sale, the cool little downtown area. And I'm talking to the owners, trying to figure out, could this be another business? I'm not serious about it, but if it worked out right, who would not love to own a coffee shop in a college mountain town? I mean, it's that you can make a movie about that. There is one thing we may end up doing. I think the 2 most logical things are to acquire adjacent land and build another building, and find some investors. I got to find the right investors, though. I don't, most VCs and private equity folks are just, even if they know healthcare, they don't know clinical trials, and this doesn't work the way you think it does.
Right.
And I'm just not. We've got talking to some family offices who do real estate-based lending and that kind of stuff. So if somebody could give me $2 or $3 million and come back and not bother me for 4 or 5 years, and then come ask me some questions at that point, that's the investor I want. I haven't found that one yet, but that's what that would take. I'm in negotiations with 2 other academic medical centers to stand up a business development entity, take over they're not as good as I am at finding new clients and getting new studies and new biotechs on board. And a lot of that comes, I think, just from my many years of knocking on doors and business development, and understanding that no, not to be rude, no doesn't mean no. No means just not right now, or no means you haven't convinced me you're really ready to do this. So that may be what we do rather than expanding. because there's no, the regulatory overhead's minimal. It's work I really love, and I think I can build a good business around that. So it's either going to be an expansion of the current operation and on a different footprint, or it's going to be the creation of a services-based entity that serves as a vendor to companies like ours. And I'm well off connected. It would be easy to find new clients.
That would be brilliant if you did the service-based one, because then you got a foot in the door. You could almost groom them to be an acquisition of yours later, right? If you looked at it, you could bring on clients, help them improve their business processes, and then groom them into something that would fit really well into what you did, and
Right.
not be such a hard shift when you made that final acquisition of the entire entity.
Right. I like that. I'd
Just
not thought about that, but that's great.
but all right. What can myself or the audience do for you? I heard a kind of an ask in there. If you know anybody out there that's does real estate investing and wants to be a very passive investor in a clinical trial, maybe that's
Yep.
one thing. But what can we do? Is there anything out there that a resource, a person, or anything that my audience or myself can to do to help you move your game forward?
So, me personally, if there's any place you can post my website so I can build some backlinks. We're starting to build a organic lead generation engine. Right now, if you Google paid clinical trial within 10 miles of the clinic, we come up on top. But we want to show up in a Google search for somebody who's researching Alzheimer's symptoms for their dad, so that they would consider clinical trials as an option in that. So that's very tactical. I'm happy to do the same. But more broadly, anybody who hears this go sign up for a couple of clinical trial sites, get your name in the database, and be seriously considered and seriously consider entering a clinical trial, particularly if you're female or African American or Hispanic, because those demographics are badly underrepresented in clinical research, and it has an impact on our overall healthcare. Most people, they don't think about it because, it's scary. It's a new medication, very safe, very, not completely safe, obviously, but, very controlled, very monitored. You're going to get probably some of the best healthcare you've ever had. We spend hours with our patients. We need to know everything that's going on. And, particularly as we're doing Alzheimer's treatment now, we have 2 or 3 people a day who have mild cognitive impairment or moderate cognitive impairment. Their quality of life is declining rapidly. Their families are very concerned, and there's nothing to treat that now. There's a few things, Aricept, to manage symptoms, but we've picked 3, and I'm in negotiations with a 4th biotech that have interesting new compounds that have, from a biological and science standpoint, the power to modify the course of that disease. And we need people in the clinical trial.
I think I was reading something, and I'm going to butcher this. I know I am. Over in Australia or somewhere where they're using, they're saying that one of these, I'm going to, like I said, I'm not a medical guy. It's either Alzheimer's or dementia. It causes a calcification of certain spots in your brain, the receptors, and they're using electrical stimulus to break that up in a different way, and they're actually having huge results in that. So I love that there's just a whole diversity of both medical, medications, procedures, and stuff like that. Do you guys do just the medical side of it, or do you actually do procedural side stuff too?
We don't have a procedure room or the appropriate infectious field control to do that type of stuff. So we'll work with local doctors and local clinics, and we're looking at device studies now, where we've got a new doc working with us. He's a well-known urologist, and there's a whole bunch of new devices out there for treating urinary incontinence and bladder control, and so we're starting with that. We're looking for a couple things. Number one, drugs that or procedures or therapies that address an unmet need, or things that do it better. There's a bazillion different hypertensive on the market now, but we're working with a biotech company that is working on a once a year or a twice a year injection will control blood pressure. And the biggest issue with blood pressure is people just stop taking their meds. Compliance and adherence. And if we can do a shot once a year versus a beta blocker every day, far fewer people are going to die of heart attacks and strokes. So, that's the type of stuff we're looking for.
I'm absolutely guilty of that. When they put me on blood pressure, my blood pressure is barely high, and there were other issues. And as soon as we cleared out all the other issues after going through scan after scan, like there's nothing physically wrong with your heart. You have no blockages and everything like that. The blood pressure medicine was making me feel ill, so I was like, okay, I'll run with high blood pressure, and we talked to the doc. He says there's no real risk. 15 years from now, 10 years from now, probably you're gonna wish you'd taken that all the time.
Well, that plays into dementia. Vascular. So there's Alzheimer's, which is a chemical process, and there's vascular dementia, which is the damage that high blood pressure does to your brain. That's the one that's most addressable. So I'd encourage you to speak with your doctor and try. There's lots of new therapies out there. I'll send you a link to this clinical trial. You may want to try it.
Cool. But, now, we're actually over our hour, but man, I could talk to you forever. There's just you're in an interesting. Not only did you choose something that will make you money and prove, to provide for you and your family and generations to come if you build it right. You've got something that's making a difference in the world, and not everything does. Like, I'm interested in coffee roasting companies and stuff like that. It makes a difference, and I guess it keeps some of these guys from murdering people. Some people are really grumpy without their coffee, but not that's in a joking sense. And in a real sense, you're working in an area that makes a huge difference in the quality of people's lives and the longevity of people's lives. And again, kudos to that, because not all of us can work in that space. But I really like what you're up to. So
I appreciate that. And I feel very lucky to. There are days, hard days, because it's a very complicated business. My wife thinks I was insane, and she thinks maybe the donut shops might have been a better call. But I've never doubted that. It does feel very good to be in this spot. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're at and above the hour, and I didn't plan plan for you. I didn't prep you to tell you we could go too much over that, so I don't want to hold you here all day, because we could talk for a lot longer. But is there anything we missed? Man, I wish that we would have talked about this so that the world would know. Are we leaving anything out?
I don't think so. But for anybody who's listening to this down the road, if you want to shoot me an email or just chat about your thoughts on becoming an entrepreneur, whether it's clinical trials or not, I'm happy to share and chat and be an informal resource. I can't get seriously involved in a sort of time commitment way, but there's 3 or 4 people who found me through the other interviews where they'll call me and I'm looking at this deal or I was thinking about that, and just, how would you handle it? How would you react? And I enjoy that. I would say the one thing that I miss, not being at Deloitte or the Quintiles, is kind of that peer group where you can just talk about these things in a non-intimidating, open forum way. So when people reach out to me through things like this, it's personal satisfaction. I like to help, but I enjoy it. I mean, it's a part of my brain I don't use much anymore because I've changed my role, and that's really the only thing I miss from those days. I miss my Delta Diamond double status when I have to fly, because I got to sit in the back. But those are the only 2 things I really miss about the old life.
I used to work for the government contracting world for a big Lockheed Martin, I'll just say it, and traveled so much. I got a lot of the free flights and all that stuff with those guys, and I don't miss the travel. As a matter of fact, I like to travel now, but I like to go. I might get off here and go drive over to the beach, right? My idea of travel now is I'm going somewhere I'm really going to enjoy being there, and that's the reason it's worth the trip. But yeah, I do appreciate you being here today. Again, thank you for being on the show. If you ever need anything, reach out to me. I'm willing to help. And the other one is we have a mergers and acquisitions kind of hangout, like a networking thing. So if you get in the acquisition mode and you want to ask a group of people questions, a lot of people from my show join that. We do it twice a month, so it's posted on LinkedIn and some other places. So if you get in that mode where you're, and we talk about sourcing and all kinds of cool stuff. So if you get in that mode where you're looking to acquire again, join in with our group and hang out with us a little bit, and we'll help each other out.
I appreciate that. I will put that on the list. All right. Thanks.